Welcome back to Tipsy Whiskey Shenanigans. I'm Steven, and tonight, whenever the heck you're watching this, we are getting into one of the age-old questions, and that is, should you or should you not buy that bourbon that is currently sitting in your cart or maybe even in your hands if you're watching this in the liquor store? What is that bottle on your mind, and should you or should you not buy it? Especially with today in the bourbon world. There's so many new brands out there. Some are sourcing, some are making their own stuff. So today I'm going over the 5 things that I personally look at when I'm looking at a new whiskey that I've never even heard anything about to kind of determine should I or should I not buy it. But before we get into that, really quickly, a word from our sponsors. This video is brought to you by ZBiotics. If you have ever skipped the gym after a night of drinking, just like I do about every single week right after my live streams, well then you need ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut, where you need it the most. Just remember to drink ZBiotics before you drink alcohol, drink responsibly, and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. Try ZBiotics for yourself today. Go to zbiotics.com/tipsy, use a QR code down there, and use the code TIPSY at checkout to get 15% off on your first order. Also, ZBiotics is 100% money back guaranteed. So if for whatever reason you are unsatisfied, they will refund you, no questions asked. We're gonna head to zbiotics.com/tipsy and use the code TIPSY at checkout to get 15% off your first order. Thank you again, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this video, but let's get back to it. So you're at a liquor store, you have a random bottle in your hands, you've never seen it, you don't know anything about it, so how are you going to determine whether you want to buy it? You know, maybe the bottle looks cool, so you picked it up. You picked it up for a reason. Now you need to decide, is this going to be a whiskey that I might actually like? One of the first things I look at when I'm looking at a new bottle that I know nothing about is the proof point. What is the proof or alcohol by volume that bottle is at? Everyone has their theoretical, proof points that they really like to drink. Some people really like the high proof stuff. Some people really like the low proof stuff. I like to drink things around 100, 110. So I usually try to gravitate towards things like that. So this is obviously going to change for everyone because everyone has their theoretical proof points that they really like. But one thing to really consider when you're looking at a new bottle is, what is the proof of it and what do you typically like to drink? And another one I like to look at a lot is the age of the whiskey. Not everything is going to have a beautiful, perfect age statement, but usually you can kind of determine based off of what it is, what's the age on that bottle. So some of them, it's going to be really easy. It's going to have a giant bright letter, Russell's 10-year. For example, this Knob Creek 12, that has a 12 on it. Knob Creek 9s. There's so many bottles with giant letters. Elijah Craig's, those all on the side, they have a 12 years old age statement on it. The age statement, basically, it's the youngest whiskey in that bottle. So if I blend together a 12, 15, and 16-year-old, I can put on the label that it is a 12-year-old whiskey, and so on and so forth. So if you're someone who gravitates towards, hey, I'm someone who likes 4, 5, 6-year-old bourbons, that's something to consider when you're looking at things. Maybe you don't really like 12-year-old age stated stuff, so, this is a huge turnoff, which, if you don't, you're crazy because that's an amazing bottle. But, if that's not your vibe, maybe that's not something you can pick up or you should pick up. But then there's also another thing to consider in the age statement category, and that is it bonded or not? So a product like this, it says bottled in bond on it. That is some federal legislation, TTB regulations and whatnot. Essentially, there's a lot of other steps. I'm not going to get in the weeds of it. But if it says it's bonded whiskey, then that means essentially it is at least 4 years old. and again, a bunch of other rules, but it's a 4-year-old whiskey. So if you're someone who typically really likes a lot of those bonded products, not all bonded products are going to be just 4 years old, but if you really like bonded products, maybe you're like, oh, hey, I gravitate towards 4-year-old bourbons. A really important thing to consider, because that oak impact really does play a lot into the flavors, even more than, say, mash bills sometimes. So if you're looking at a bottle and you know you gravitate towards some sort of age statement, but it's like way younger or way older than you typically like, maybe you shouldn't pick up that bottle. But say it's a 12-year-old age statement and you are a sucker for 12 years old, maybe you should pick up that bottle. And then the next one that I care a lot about, which has a lot to do with the flavor, just like the proof, as well as the age statement, state of distillation, and or sourcing. A lot of people source whiskey nowadays. A lot of those new brands you don't know much about, they usually are sourcing, so that can kind of help determine whether or not you like something. You are legally required as a producer to put the state of distillation on the bottle, unless if it is also produced in that same state. So say it's a bottle from Kentucky that's produced in Kentucky, you don't have to put distilled in Kentucky, you could just say produced in Kentucky, so on and so forth. So for example, this Knob Creek 12 that I've been referencing, on the back it says distilled and bottled by Knob Creek. This is obviously distilled by Knob Creek because they do not source at all. So that's a good reference of like, if they produce the bottle themselves, where it's located, that's where it's going to be distilled. But for example, this Chicken Cock Rye, this producer, they only source whiskey. But on the back, all it says, it doesn't say anything about distilled, so on and so forth. It says bottled by Grain and Barrel Spirits, Bardstown, Kentucky, because this stuff is sourced from a Kentucky distillery. Which one? I don't know. You have to do a little bit more research to find that out. It's thought that that stuff is distilled at Bardstown, but again, it's just conjecture at that point. And then another final example of it, this stuff. Redwood Empire, they do some awesome stuff, and they source from 3 different locations as well as distill their own stuff. So on the back of it, it says right here, if I can find it, it says distilled in California, which is where Redwood Empire is. That's their juice. And then it also says Indiana, MGP, Kentucky, I don't know, there's 1,000 Kentucky distilleries, and Tennessee, likely Dickel. So that is a good determination whether you're going to like that bottle or not. So say you know, for example, you're like, I freaking hate Dickel stuff. If it's a source product and it says distilled in Tennessee, stay away from that stuff. Stay away from that. Say you don't like MGP, says distilled in Indiana. That's likely going to be an MGP bottle. But on the vice versa of that, say you're a sucker for MGP. You're not a huge fan of a lot of the Kentucky-based distilleries. You just love that sourced MGP juice. You're going to go for those bottles that say distilled in Indiana, so on and so forth. And obviously that takes a lot of experience and a lot of kind of know-how, how to, interpret that and understand that and know what kind of stuff you like. But that's something I take into consideration, because me, on the other hand, I do not really enjoy Dickel bourbon. I don't really love Dickel bourbon, but when it comes to the rye world, I love MGP rye. So if I'm looking at a new rye and it says distilled in Indiana, I'm going to throw my wallet at that without hesitation, because I know that's going to be a rye that I'm likely really, really going to enjoy. And the last one before I get into the main thing I look at compiled with all these other things is it finished or not? Are they double bearing? So on and so forth. Some people really like a type of finish. Some people don't really like another type of finish. Like, for example, I used to really love port finish stuff. Now, I'm not really vibing with a lot of port finish stuff, but I'm really, really loving a lot of sherry finish stuff. So that is just something to consider. What kind of finishings do you like? Is it finish? Yes or no? And what kind of finishings it is. Obviously, again, just like everything else, you need to know kind of what you like before you can apply these. But it is nice information to know and to look out for once you do know that. And then last, not least, probably the most important, compiled with all those 4 things that we already covered, what's the price of it? What is the price? That is probably the biggest thing to consider. So for me, for example, I know like a cash strength, like 115, 120 proof MGP single barrel that's around 5 or 6 years old should be around $60 to $80 nowadays. depending on who made it, if it's not finished or anything, say it's just, you know, straight up just typical traditional bourbon, I know it should be around that price point. So if I see it for $120 myself, I'm a no on that. If I see it for, say, like 55, I'm buying multiples of that. So the biggest thing I like to focus on is applying those 4 things that we previously covered into the price point and kind of knowing what you should be getting for that price point to kind of determine should you or should you not buy that bottle. I can buy about $150 worth of whiskey every single month, depending on how well the channel does. So I like to selectively pick the bottles I'm doing. So if I'm buying a new bottle, which is something I really like to do because I like to try new things, I'm going to try to go outside of the box, but I want to do so smartly. I want to apply these 4 or 5 things and then try to maximize the quality of the product I get to what I like with the actual price point that I'm willing to pay for said quality. So those are the 5 things I like to focus on and pay attention to when I'm trying to decide, should I or should I not buy this bottle? Please do me the favor, like, comment, and subscribe. That helps us out a ton. Let me know down below what you thought about mine, and if I missed anything, what do you also pay attention to? I know I kind of covered everything very generally, but what else do you pay attention to? Also, check out the Facebook, Instagram, and the Patreon. Links for all that stuff are down there below. That is a wrap for today's video. Cheers, y'all. We'll see you later.